I stood in my kitchen, staring at the envelope on the table. $5 million. That's what my daughter-in-law was offering me to disappear from my son's life. The check sat there like a coiled snake, waiting to strike. My hands trembled as I picked it up, not from excitement, but from something deeper. A cold realization that Sophia wasn't just trying to buy my silence. She was trying to bury something. And suddenly, like shattered glass reassembling itself, I remembered what it was. My name is Ellen Whiter. I'm 65 years old, and I've spent most of my life fighting battles I never asked for. This story isn't about money, though. It's about the kind of secrets that destroy families from the inside out. The kind that make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. If you're here, stay with me. This channel is new, and every day we'll share stories like this. Real, raw, and honest. Hit that subscribe button, because some truths need witnesses. 2 years ago, when David told me he was marrying Sophia Lancaster, I should have seen the warning signs. But I was too busy being grateful that my youngest son had found someone successful. Someone who could give him the stability I never could. After his father died, I raised 3 children on a waitress's salary and whatever odd jobs I could pick up. Diane, Victor, and David. They were my whole world. I'd scrubbed floors at midnight and skipped meals so they wouldn't have to. They all turned out fine. Good people with kind hearts. That's all I ever wanted. Sophia was different from anyone David had ever dated. She was polished, powerful, the CEO of a petroleum company her father had built. At their wedding, she barely looked at me. When she did, her eyes were flat, calculating, like she was measuring how much space I took up in David's life and deciding it was too much. She's just nervous, David said when I mentioned it. Meeting new family is hard for her. She's not used to warmth. I let it go. I wanted him happy. I'd learned long ago that sometimes love means stepping back, even when your instincts scream at you to hold tighter. But Sophia never warmed up. She canceled dinners, invented emergencies whenever David suggested I visit their penthouse. At Christmas, she sent a gift basket instead of inviting me to their home. The card was signed by her assistant. My son made excuses. Work was demanding. They were traveling. Next time for sure. I watched him shrink a little each time he said it, his smile not quite reaching his eyes anymore. I tried talking to my other children about it. Diane, my oldest, was diplomatic as always. Give her time, Mom. Some people don't do families the way we do. Victor was blunter. She's a snob. David will figure it out. But neither of them saw how much it was eating at me, how every canceled dinner felt like another brick in a wall being built between me and my youngest son. The hardest part was watching David change. He'd always been the most open of my children, the one who called just to chat, who remembered little details about my life. Now our conversations were short, distracted. He'd mention trips to places I'd never see, restaurants I couldn't afford, a life that felt further away each day. And when I asked if everything was okay, he'd say yes, with a voice that said no. 3 months ago, everything changed. Sophia called me directly for the first time since the wedding. Her voice was crisp, businesslike. We need to meet. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. There's a cafe on Madison Avenue. Lucien's. Come alone. She hung up before I could ask why. I spent that night unable to sleep, running through possibilities. Maybe she wanted to make peace. Maybe she was pregnant and wanted to include me. Maybe David had pushed her to reach out. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've been starved for it. The cafe smelled like espresso and burnt sugar. Sophia was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, her Chanel suit perfect, her expression unreadable. She didn't stand when I approached, didn't smile, just gestured to the chair across from her like I was an employee called in for a performance review. "Thank you for coming," she said, though nothing in her tone suggested gratitude. I sat down slowly, my coat still buttoned. The leather seat was cold beneath me. "What's this about?" She slid the envelope across the table. It was thick, cream-colored, expensive, the kind of envelope that holds something life-changing. $5 million, she said, in exchange for you signing a contract agreeing to cease all contact with David. No calls, no visits, no holidays. You disappear from his life completely. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The noise of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the clink of cups against saucers, faded into a dull roar. I stared at her, searching for some sign that this was a joke, some flicker of humanity. There was none. You want me to abandon my son, I said slowly. For money. I want to protect my marriage, she corrected. You're a constant reminder of David's past. A past that doesn't fit with the life we're building. He'll never fully move forward with you pulling him backward. I'm his mother. You're a liability. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Take the money, Ellen. It's more than you'll ever see otherwise. You could retire, travel, live comfortably for the rest of your life. Isn't that what mothers want? To not be a burden? The words hit like a slap. I felt heat rising in my chest, anger and hurt tangled together. But underneath, something else stirred. A memory, vague and unsettling, trying to surface. Why now? I asked. What are you really afraid of? Her jaw tightened. Just for a second, I saw it. Fear, sharp and cold, behind those calculating eyes. I'm not afraid of anything, she said. This is a generous offer. I suggest you take it. She stood, leaving the envelope on the table, and walked out without looking back. Her perfume lingered, something expensive and floral that made my stomach turn. I sat there for a long time, staring at that envelope. Outside, rain began to fall, streaking the windows like tears. And slowly, painfully, the memories started coming back. 5 years ago. That's when it started. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 3 years by then, killed in an accident at a construction site. The official report said equipment failure, but I'd never believed it. Robert was careful, meticulous. Something had gone wrong, something they'd covered up. I was still struggling to keep the family afloat when a man approached me at Robert's grave. It was a Tuesday morning, early. Frost still clung to the grass, and my breath made small clouds in the cold air. I'd been talking to Robert, telling him about David's acceptance to community college, about Diane's promotion at work, about how we were managing even though we missed him every single day. The man appeared so quietly I didn't hear him coming. He was in his 60s, well-dressed, confident. His coat was cashmere, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Your husband was a good man, he said. I worked with him briefly before his death. I'd like to help his family if you'll allow it. He introduced himself as Richard Lancaster. The name meant nothing to me then. He explained that Robert had been developing a new construction technique, something innovative that could revolutionize the industry. A method for reinforcing foundation structures that was both cheaper and more effective than anything currently in use. Robert had been working on it in his spare time, had mentioned it to a few colleagues, including Richard. Now Richard wanted to invest in bringing Robert's vision to life through his company. He showed me documents, contracts, spoke about percentages and profits. 30% of future earnings would go to our family, a legacy for Robert, security for us. He made it sound so reasonable, so generous, a chance to turn tragedy into something meaningful. I was grieving, exhausted, desperate. The bills were piling up. Victor needed dental work we couldn't afford. Diane was helping with expenses instead of saving for her own future. And David, my baby, was working nights at a gas station to help pay for school. I was drowning, and Richard Lancaster was throwing me a rope. I signed. For a year, there were updates, progress reports. Richard called occasionally, always polite, always reassuring. The project was moving forward. Tests were being conducted. The technique was proving even more effective than anticipated. He spoke about Robert with respect, called him a visionary. It felt good to hear my husband's name said that way, to believe that his death hadn't been entirely meaningless. Then the calls stopped. When I tried to reach him, his secretary said he was unavailable, traveling internationally, in meetings. I left messages that went unreturned, sent letters that received form responses. The company had restructured, they explained. The project had been absorbed into a larger division. The terms had changed. New investors had come in with different agreements. My 30% had somehow become 5%, then 2%, then disappeared entirely in legal language I couldn't understand. I tried to fight it. Hired a lawyer with money I didn't have, borrowed from my sister, maxed out a credit card. We scheduled meetings, requested documents. But the original contracts had disappeared, lost in a fire at the company's storage facility, they claimed. Convenient. Without proof, without documentation, I had nothing. The case collapsed. The lawyer apologized, suggested I cut my losses. I went back to working double shifts, swallowing my anger, telling my children that sometimes life just isn't fair. I'd forgotten about Richard Lancaster. Or maybe I'd forced myself to forget, because remembering meant acknowledging how thoroughly I'd been defeated, how easily I'd been manipulated, how I'd failed to protect even my husband's memory. But now, sitting in that cafe with Sophia's envelope in front of me, it all crashed back. Richard Lancaster. Sophia Lancaster. She was his daughter, and she knew. God, she knew everything. I didn't go home right away. I walked for hours, my mind spinning, piecing together fragments I'd buried too deep. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the city lights in broken patterns. My feet ached in my old shoes, but I barely noticed. I found myself at the public library, sitting at one of the old computers in the back, my fingers shaking as I typed. Richard Lancaster. Obituary. Dead 4 years ago. Heart attack. Tributes from business leaders, politicians, charity boards. A titan of industry, they called him. A man who built an empire. Photos showed a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and a confident smile, accepting awards, shaking hands with mayors and senators. The comments section below the obituary was filled with praise. A visionary, a generous philanthropist, a man who changed the construction industry. I felt sick reading them. An empire built on stolen dreams and dead men's work. I searched for Sophia next. Article after article about her rise in the petroleum industry, her innovative approaches, her aggressive expansion. There were profiles in Forbes, Bloomberg, Fortune. She was called a prodigy, a genius, someone who'd taken her father's foundation and built something even more impressive. And there, buried in a profile from 3 years ago, a single line that made my blood run cold. Lancaster credits her success to her father's early investments and the pioneering techniques he developed in the construction sector before pivoting to energy. Pioneering techniques. Robert's techniques. The ones Richard had promised to honor, to share profits from, to make into my husband's legacy. I kept digging. Found more articles, more references. The Lancaster Corporation had used Robert's foundation technique in dozens of major projects across 3 continents. Buildings, bridges, offshore oil platforms, each one generating millions in contracts, billions in total revenue, and my family had received nothing, not even acknowledgement. She'd built her empire on my husband's grave, and now she wanted to pay me to disappear, because if I started digging, if I started asking questions, if I found the right people who remembered, who might still have copies of those original documents, her whole world could come crashing down. I didn't tell David right away. How could I? How do you tell your son that his wife is the daughter of the man who destroyed your family? That his marriage is built on a foundation of lies and stolen futures? That the woman he loves is part of a legacy of betrayal? For 3 weeks, I said nothing. I let Sophia believe I was considering her offer. I avoided David's calls, claiming I had a cold, that I'd call back soon. But really, I was paralyzed. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the right thing was. The truth? Or my son's happiness? Justice for Robert? Or peace for David? I took out the old photo albums, the ones I hadn't opened in years. There was Robert on our wedding day, young and handsome and full of hope. Robert holding baby Dayeen, his face transformed with wonder. Robert teaching Victor to ride a bike, teaching David to tie his shoes. Robert at the construction site, hard hat on, blueprints spread across a makeshift table, pointing at something with that focused expression he got when he was problem-solving. He'd been a good man. Not perfect. He could be stubborn, and he worked too much, and he never remembered to take the trash out without being reminded 3 times. But he was honest. He believed in doing things the right way, even when the wrong way would have been easier or more profitable. He used to say that shortcuts in construction got people killed, and shortcuts in life killed your soul. What would he want me to do now? $5 million felt like blood money, but it also felt like the weight of every unpaid bill, every skipped meal, every night I'd cried myself to sleep wondering how I'd failed my family. It was more money than I'd earn in 3 lifetimes. I could help Dayeen with her mortgage, help Victor start the business he'd always dreamed about, set up a fund for David's future children. I could finally stop worrying about money, stop living on the edge of disaster, stop feeling like one emergency away from losing everything. Wasn't that worth something? Wasn't my silence worth that much? If it meant security for my children? I'm not proud of what I felt in those dark hours. The temptation was real. Take the money. Walk away. Let the past stay buried. Wasn't that what everyone wanted? Sophia, David, even Robert. Hadn't he always said that all he wanted was for us to be okay? But okay isn't the same as right. And I kept coming back to one moment, one memory. David at 7 years old coming home from school upset. Another kid had cheated on a test, and David had seen it but said nothing. The kid got a perfect score, praise from the teacher, a gold star. David got a B and felt like a failure. Why didn't you tell? I'd asked. Because everyone says he's my friend. Because if I tell, everyone will hate me. Robert had knelt down, looked David in the eyes. Being right isn't always popular, buddy. Sometimes standing up for the truth costs you something. But you know what costs more? Living with yourself when you know you stayed quiet about something wrong. David had told the teacher the next day. Lost that friend and a few others. Spent a lonely few weeks at recess. But he'd been able to look at himself in the mirror. I realized I'd been teaching my children about integrity their entire lives. And now, faced with my own test, I was considering taking the bribe. What kind of mother would that make me? I started making calls. Old contacts from Robert's days. People who'd worked with him. Who might remember Richard Lancaster. Most had moved on. Didn't want to revisit old business. Some didn't even remember Robert, which hurt more than I'd expected. Others remembered but were cautious, evasive. One man hung up when I mentioned Lancaster's name, but one person agreed to meet me. Tom Brennan, a retired engineer who'd been on site the day Robert died. We sat in a diner in Queens, steam rising from our coffee cups. Tom looked older than I remembered, his face lined with years of carrying secrets. His hands shook slightly as he wrapped them around his mug, seeking warmth. I always wondered if anyone would come asking, he said quietly. The accident wasn't an accident, Ellen. The equipment was sabotaged. Richard Lancaster wanted Robert's designs, but Robert wouldn't sell them outright. He wanted a partnership, fairness. Richard couldn't stand that. My throat tightened. What do you mean, sabotaged? The crane that failed. The inspection reports had been falsified. Robert had flagged concerns about it 3 days before. Said it needed maintenance. Shouldn't be used until it was fixed. But Lancaster was pushing for deadline, for speed. He overruled the safety protocols. Do you have proof? Tom shook his head. Nothing that would hold up in court. But I know what I saw. The investigation was rushed. The reports doctored. Richard had money, connections. People who asked too many questions found themselves unemployed. I had 3 kids in school, a mortgage. His voice cracked. I stayed quiet. I'm sorry. Why didn't you say something? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I had a family too, he said, and the shame in his eyes was answer enough. I told myself it wouldn't bring Robert back, that destroying my own life wouldn't help yours, but I've thought about it every day since. Every single day. We sat in silence for a while. The diner hummed around us, the sizzle of the griddle, the murmur of other conversations, the clink of silverware. Normal sounds in a world that felt anything but normal. Did you ever meet his daughter? I asked. Sophia? Tom's expression darkened. Once. She came to a project site about 6 years ago, back when she was just starting in the business. She had her father's blueprints. Robert's blueprints, really. And she was explaining them to potential investors like they were Lancaster innovations. I tried to talk to her afterward, to tell her the truth. She looked right through me like I was invisible. Did she know? About what her father did? I don't know. But she knew those weren't her family's designs. She had to. Robert's signature was on the original schematics, hidden in the technical annotations. Anyone who really studied them would see it. I thanked him and left. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent to my grief. I had no documents, no concrete evidence, just the word of a frightened old man, and my own memories of a husband who'd believed in doing things the right way. It wasn't enough for a courtroom, but it was enough for me. I called Sophia and asked to meet again. Same cafe, same table. This time I was early. I watched her walk in, confident and cold, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger anymore. Something clearer, harder. Purpose. She sat down. Have you made your decision? I have, I said. I'm not taking your money. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her shoulders tense. That would be unwise. Would it? I leaned forward. Tell me, Sophia. Does David know about your father? About what he did to mine? The color drained from her face. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely afraid. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. That's why you wanted me gone. Not because I'm embarrassing or inconvenient, but because you're terrified I'll remember, that I'll start asking questions, that I'll find what your father tried so hard to bury. You have no proof, she said, her voice sharp but wavering. No documents, no witnesses who'll testify. Even if you did, it's been too long. Statute of limitations, Ellen. You can't touch us legally. Maybe not legally, I said, but I can tell David the truth. I can tell him that his wife's fortune is built on his grandfather's stolen work, that the woman he loves is the daughter of the man who destroyed his family. How do you think he'll feel about that? She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Several people looked over. She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. If you do that, you'll lose him forever. He'll never forgive you for destroying his marriage. He loves me. Maybe, I said, keeping my voice steady, but he'll know the truth, and he'll make his own choice. That's more than your father gave my husband. My father built an empire. Your husband was just what? I interrupted. Just a construction worker? Just someone whose ideas weren't worth crediting? Just someone whose life didn't matter as much as your father's ambitions? She opened her mouth, closed it. For a moment she looked lost, like a little girl who'd realized the bedtime story she'd been told all her life was actually a nightmare. I didn't know, she said finally. Not at first. Not until I was already in the business, already using the techniques. By then, what was I supposed to do? Dismantle everything my father built? Destroy my own career? You could have made it right, I said. You could have found me, acknowledged the truth, shared what was fair, but you didn't. You built higher and higher on that stolen foundation, and when you finally met me through David, you realized the risk I represented. So you decided to erase me instead of facing what your family did. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, I said. You had a choice. You still do. You can keep trying to bury this, keep trying to buy silence, keep building on lies, or you can do what's right. She stared at me for a long moment. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes, the weighing of risks and costs and consequences. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. I sat there alone, my heart pounding. I'd drawn my line. Now I had to live with the consequences. 3 days later, David showed up at my apartment. It was late, past 10, and he looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, his clothes rumpled like he'd been wearing them for days. He didn't say hello, just walked in and sat on my old couch, his head in his hands. I made tea, the way I always did when my kids were upset. Chamomile with honey. The ritual of it steadied my shaking hands. She told me, he said finally, everything. Her father, your husband, the investment, the theft. She said you were going to destroy us. I sat down beside him, leaving space between us. The couch springs creaked under our weight, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times but had never really noticed until now. I'm not trying to destroy anything, David. I just wanted the truth out. Why now? He looked up at me, and I saw Robert in his face. The same honesty, the same pain when confronted with injustice. Why couldn't you just let it go? Dad's been gone for 8 years. Whatever happened, it's over. It's done. It's not over for me, I said quietly. It's not over for your father's memory. And it wasn't over for Sophia either, or she wouldn't have tried to pay me $5 million to disappear. Did she tell you that part? He closed his eyes. Yes. And you're still with her? I love her, he said simply, desperately. I know what her father did was wrong. I know it hurt you, hurt our family. But Sophia isn't her father. She didn't kill Dad. She was just a kid when all this happened. She knew, I said. She's known this whole time. And she said nothing. She built her life on stolen ground and expected me to just accept it. She tried to erase me from your life rather than face what her family did. What do you want from me, Mom? His voice rose, cracking with emotion. You want me to leave her? Hate her? Spend my life angry at ghosts? I can't bring Dad back. I can't undo what her father did. So what am I supposed to do? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about all the times I'd had to make impossible choices as a mother. The times I'd worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford to buy birthday presents. The times I'd smiled through exhaustion so my kids wouldn't worry. The times I'd pretended everything was okay when it absolutely wasn't. Being a parent means sometimes you have to let your children make their own mistakes. Sometimes you have to let them choose paths you wouldn't choose, love people you wouldn't love, build lives that look nothing like what you imagined for them. But it also means teaching them that some things matter more than comfort, that truth matters, that integrity matters, that the people we love don't get a pass on doing what's right. I reached over and took his hand. It was large now, calloused from his own work, but I could still remember when it was small enough to fit entirely in my palm. I want you to make a choice with your eyes open, I said. I want you to know who you're married to, not the perfect image she projects, but the real person, the one who was willing to pay to erase me from your life because she was scared of the truth. If you can love her knowing all that, if you can build a life with her despite all that, then I'll step back. But you deserve to know. He pulled his hand away, stood up, paced to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, just a few cars passing, their headlights cutting through the darkness. A siren wailed in the distance, then faded. She's not a bad person, he said finally, his breath fogging the glass. She's just scared. Her father taught her that you protect what's yours at any cost. That vulnerability is weakness. That admitting mistakes means losing everything. She doesn't know how to be any different. That's not an excuse. I know. He turned to face me, and I saw tears on his face. But it's an explanation. And maybe she can learn. If I stay, if I show her that there's another way, that you can admit fault and still survive, that you can make amends without destroying everything. My chest tightened. This was it. The moment where I had to let go or hold on. Where I had to trust that I'd raised him right. That he could navigate this complicated mess on his own. If you stay with her, I said slowly, she needs to make this right. Not with money to me, but with acknowledgement. With truth. An apology. A public recognition of what her father did and what your father created. A donation in your father's name. Something meaningful that honors what he invented. Can you ask her that? I can try. And David? I waited until he met my eyes. I'm your mother. I'm not going anywhere. If she can't accept that, if she still wants me erased from your life, then you need to decide what matters more. Her comfort or our family. Can you do that? He nodded, tears spilling over. I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. For not seeing sooner. For letting her treat you that way. For choosing her over you. Even for a little while. I know, baby. Me too. He crossed the room and hugged me, and for a moment he was 7 years old again. Small and scared, and needing his mother to tell him everything would be okay. I don't know if I can fix this, he whispered. Maybe you can't, I said. Maybe she can't either, but you can try. And that's all any of us can do. It took 2 months. 2 months of difficult conversations, therapy sessions, lawyers reviewing what little documentation existed. Sophia fought it at first, defensive and angry. She accused me of trying to ruin her, of being vindictive, of inventing stories to justify my jealousy of her success. But David didn't back down. He told her what I'd told him, that she had a choice. She could keep hiding behind her father's legacy, keep pretending the foundation of her empire was clean, or she could step out of his shadow and become someone different, someone better. I fell in love with you, he told her one night, in a conversation he later recounted to me. But I don't know if I can stay in love with someone who values money more than truth, more than my family, more than doing what's right. It was the first time anyone had truly held Sophia accountable. Her father had taught her that wealth and power meant never having to apologize, never having to admit fault, that you could buy your way out of consequences, that lawyers and NDAs and strategic donations could erase any inconvenient truth. But she couldn't buy David. And she was realizing she couldn't buy her own conscience either. I learned later, from David, about the sleepless nights she had, about how she'd started pulling out her father's old files, looking through them with new eyes, about how she'd found Robert's signature on documents, his handwriting on blueprints, evidence of the theft she'd convinced herself was just aggressive business, about how she'd discovered notes in her father's private journals, locked in a safe she'd never opened, where he'd written about managing the whiter problem and ensuring the technique couldn't be traced back, about how she'd realized that her father hadn't just stolen ideas. He'd actively covered his tracks, destroyed evidence, possibly even. She couldn't finish that thought, David said. Couldn't face the possibility that the crane failure hadn't been an accident at all. The woman who finally came back to the negotiating table wasn't the same one who'd offered me $5 million to disappear. She looked smaller somehow, despite her expensive clothes and perfect hair. Older, more human. The Robert Whiter Foundation was established with a $5 million donation, the same amount she'd offered me to disappear. But this wasn't a payment for silence. It was restitution, acknowledgement, a first step toward making something right out of something terribly wrong. It provides scholarships for construction workers' children, funding for safety innovations, support for families who've lost someone to workplace accidents. Sophia's company sponsors it publicly. She insisted on that. No hiding, no quiet donations, no NDAs. It had to be public, traceable, permanent. At the opening ceremony, she stood at the podium and told the truth. Not all of it. The lawyers wouldn't allow that, but enough. About her father's mistakes, about the techniques that had been developed by Robert Whiter, about the debt her success owed to a man she'd never met but whose genius had shaped her entire career. "My father taught me that business was about winning," she said, her voice steady but strained. "That success meant being smarter, faster, more ruthless than your competitors. But he didn't teach me that real success has to be built on truth, on credit given where it's due, on making amends when you've benefited from someone else's loss." She paused, gripping the podium. "I can't undo what happened. I can't bring Robert Whiter back, but I can make sure his name is remembered, his contributions are recognized, and his family receives some measure of what they were owed. This foundation is a start. It's not enough, and it never will be, but it's something." I stood in the back, watching. David was beside me, his hand on my shoulder. Diane and Victor had come too, flanking us like bookends. My whole family together, witnessing this moment. When Sophia finished speaking and stepped down, she looked directly at me. Her expression was complicated. Shame, relief, maybe even gratitude. She nodded once. I nodded back. "We're not friends. We may never be, but we've found a way to exist in the same space without destroying each other. For David's sake, for Robert's memory, and for the truth that needed telling. 3 weeks ago, Sophia invited me to dinner at their penthouse. Just the three of us. It was the first time I'd been to their home since the wedding. The penthouse was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern art on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than my yearly rent, but it felt sterile, cold, like a magazine spread instead of a home. Sophia had cooked, which surprised me. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but she'd made it herself. Her hands shook slightly as she served. It was awkward at first, stilted. We talked about safe things, the weather, a movie David had seen, renovations at the Foundation's first scholarship center. But then David told a story about his father, something funny I'd forgotten. About the time Robert had tried to build me a bookshelf and accidentally made it 3 inches too tall to fit in the room, and rather than admitting his mistake, he'd spent an entire weekend sanding down the ceiling. Sophia actually laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine. "He sounds like he was stubborn." "Impossibly stubborn," I agreed. "He once spent 6 hours trying to fix a leaky faucet because he refused to call a plumber, flooded the bathroom twice before he finally gave up. But he always meant well," David added, "even when he was being ridiculous. He sounds like a good man," Sophia said quietly, "and he would have been proud of what we're doing now, what we're all doing." She looked down at her plate, and for just a moment, I saw the girl underneath the armor, young, uncertain, trying to figure out how to be a person her father never taught her to be. "I'm sorry," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "For all of it, for what my father did, for what I tried to do. I was just so scared that if you stayed close, you'd figure it out, and everything would fall apart." "Things did fall apart," I said, "but sometimes that's how you build something better, from honest pieces instead of stolen ones." David reached across the table, taking both our hands in his. His grip was strong, steady. "Thank you," he said to me, "for not giving up, for fighting, for teaching me that some things matter more than being comfortable." "That's what mothers do," I said, "even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Sophia squeezed my hand, tentatively. It wasn't much, but it was something. A bridge being built, one careful step at a time. I'm still living in my small apartment in Brooklyn. I could move now, with the consulting position the Foundation offered me. Part-time, respectful, using my experience to help other families navigate the aftermath of workplace tragedies. The salary is generous, more than I've ever made. But I like my apartment. I like the way the morning light comes through the kitchen window, warming the chipped countertop. I like the sound of my neighbors arguing in Spanish upstairs, their voices rising and falling like a familiar song. I like the bodega on the corner where Ramon still gives me free coffee on Wednesdays and asks about my kids. I like knowing every crack in the sidewalk, every face on the street. Some things shouldn't change just because you can afford to change them. This place holds memories of Robert helping the kids with homework at this table, of birthday parties crammed into the tiny living room, of late-night conversations in the kitchen when the world felt too heavy. Moving would feel like abandoning those ghosts, and I've learned that some ghosts deserve to be honored, not erased. David visits now, every Sunday. Sometimes Sophia comes with him. Last week, she brought flowers, simple daisies from the corner market, not the expensive arrangements she used to send through her assistant. She put them in my old glass vase herself, adjusting them until they looked right. "I never learned how to do normal things," she said, staring at the flowers. "My father had people for everything. I didn't arrange flowers or cook meals or connect with people without a business agenda. I'm trying to learn. It takes time," I told her. "Nobody's born knowing how to be human. We all have to learn it." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Real, unguarded vulnerability. "I used to think you were the problem," she admitted, "that you represented everything unsophisticated about David's past, everything he needed to leave behind to fit into my world. But you weren't the problem. My world is. I built it on my father's blueprint, and his blueprint was broken. So build a new one," I said. "You're smart enough, strong enough. You don't have to be your father's daughter. You can be yourself." She nodded, blinking back tears. David put his arm around her, and I saw the way she leaned into him. Not the controlled, calculated lean of someone performing affection, but the real collapse of someone who needed support, and was finally allowing herself to accept it. "We're building something, slow and careful, like reconstructing a broken vase. It's not perfect. There are cracks that will always show, gaps where pieces are missing that we'll never find. But it's real, and it's ours, and it's built on truth instead of secrets." Last month, something unexpected happened. A reporter reached out, wanting to do a story on the foundation. She'd been digging into Richard Lancaster's business history for a larger piece about corporate ethics, and had stumbled across the Robert Whiter story. Sophia called me, panicked. She's asking questions. About my father, about the theft, about whether there was criminal activity. If this gets out, it could destroy everything. The foundation, the company, my reputation. Part of me, the part that still carried anger like a stone in my chest, wanted to say good, wanted to tell her that sometimes destruction is what's needed, that maybe her empire should fall if it's built on lies. But I thought about David, about the good the foundation was already doing, about the families receiving scholarships, the safety innovations being funded, the lives being changed, about Sophia, imperfect and scared, but genuinely trying to be better. "Tell the truth," I said. "All of it. Whatever she asks, answer honestly. It's the only way through. I could lose everything. Maybe," I agreed, "but you'll keep yourself, and that's worth more than you think." The article came out 2 weeks ago. It was fair, but unflinching. It detailed Richard Lancaster's theft, the suspicious circumstances of Robert's death, the years of cover-up. It showed how Sophia had initially perpetuated the lies, how she'd tried to buy my silence, but it also covered the foundation, the restitution, the truth-telling. The headline read, "From Theft to Redemption, How One Family's Secret Became Another Family's Healing." The response was mixed. Some people praised Sophia's transparency and efforts to make amends. Others called it too little, too late. Some demanded she step down from her company. Others said she should be prosecuted. The board of her company held emergency meetings. Investors got nervous. Stock prices fluctuated. But Sophia didn't hide. She did interviews, took responsibility, answered the hard questions. She didn't make excuses or blame her father or try to minimize what happened. She just told the truth, over and over, in every forum that would listen. "I benefited from theft," she said in one interview. I built my success on someone else's stolen work. I can't undo that, but I can acknowledge it. I can work to make it right, and I can make sure it never happens again. Watching her on television, composed and honest and scared, I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never completely, but something softer. Recognition that she was trying, that she was choosing to be better than her father had been, that she was willing to risk everything to do what was right, even though it came late, even though it cost her. Victor called me after the article came out. "Mom, you okay? This must be bringing up a lot." "I'm okay," I said, and realized I meant it. It's hard, seeing it all laid out like that, seeing Dad's name in headlines, the details of what happened, but it also feels right, like finally, after all these years, someone saying out loud what we've known all along, that he mattered, that what happened to him was wrong. "You think Sophia's really changed?" he asked. "Or is this just damage control?" "I think it's both," I said honestly. "I think she's trying to protect what she has, but I also think she's realizing that what she had was built on sand, that real protection comes from truth, not hiding." "Are you going to forgive her?" The question hung in the air. I watched the steam rise from my coffee, curling and disappearing. "I don't know," I admitted. Forgiveness is complicated, but I think I'm willing to let her try to earn it, and that's something. Diane called too, more pragmatic as always. The foundation's getting a lot of attention now. Donations are pouring in. They might need to expand staff. "You should ask for a raise." I laughed. "That's not really the point, sweetheart. I know, Mom, but you've sacrificed enough. It's okay to let good things come from this too. For you, not just for everyone else." She was right, of course. I'd spent so long focused on justice, on truth, on making things right for Robert's memory, that I hadn't thought much about what this meant for my own future. The foundation was offering me more hours, a leadership role in the family outreach program. The salary would be comfortable, not extravagant, but enough to finally breathe. I could retire from waitressing, could stop working jobs that left my feet aching and my back screaming, could have time to garden, to read, to visit my children without exhaustion hanging over every interaction. For the first time in 8 years, I could imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. Yesterday, Sophia asked if I wanted to speak at the Foundation's annual gala. "You don't have to," she said quickly. "I know it's asking a lot, but people want to hear from you, from Robert's family. They want to know what this means, what justice looks like when it comes late." I thought about saying no. Public speaking terrifies me, and the idea of standing in front of wealthy donors and business leaders makes my stomach churn. But then I thought about Robert, about how he never got to tell his own story, about how he died without recognition, without credit, without justice. Maybe I could tell it for him. "I'll do it," I said, "but I'm not going to make them comfortable. I'm going to tell the truth." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Sophia said. "So next week, I'll stand on a stage in a ballroom I could never afford to rent, wearing a dress Diane insisted on buying me, and I'll tell a room full of strangers about my husband, about his brilliance, and his integrity, and his death, about the years of silence and theft and loss, about the cost of secrets and the price of truth, and I'll tell them that justice delayed isn't justice denied, that it's never too late to acknowledge wrong, to make amends, to try to build something good from something terrible. I don't know if they'll listen. I don't know if it will matter, but I'll say it anyway, because some truths need to be spoken, even when they're uncomfortable, especially when they're uncomfortable. This morning, I went to Robert's grave for the first time in months. I usually go on his birthday and our anniversary, but today I just needed to sit with him, to tell him everything that's happened. The cemetery was quiet, just the sound of wind through the trees and distant traffic. I sat on the grass beside his headstone, not caring that the ground was cold and damp. "We did it," I told him. "Not the way we planned, not when we should have, but your name is out there now. People know what you created, what you gave. And there's a foundation helping families like ours, doing good work in your name." I traced his name on the stone. Robert James Whiter, beloved husband and father. "David's okay," I continued. "He's figuring it out, learning to love someone complicated, learning to hold people accountable while still giving them grace. You'd be proud of him. Of all of them, really. Dayane's strong. Victor's kind. And David's got your sense of justice. They turned out good, Robert. Despite everything. The wind picked up, rustling through the nearby trees. For a moment, I could almost imagine it was him, responding, telling me he was proud, telling me I'd done enough, been enough, fought hard enough. I miss you, I whispered. Every day, I miss you. But I'm okay now. Finally, after all these years, I'm okay. I stayed for a while longer, just sitting in the quiet. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed. Grief doesn't work that way. But settled. Like a long conversation had finally reached its conclusion. I think about that envelope sometimes. That check for $5 million. I think about how close I came to taking it, to believing that money could fill the holes that grief and injustice had carved into my life. I think about how different everything would be if I'd chosen silence over truth. David would still be married to Sophia, but he wouldn't really know her. I'd be comfortable, but I'd be complicit. Robert's name would still be forgotten, his contribution still stolen, his death still unavenged. And I would have to live with myself knowing I'd traded my integrity for security, that when it mattered most, when I had the chance to stand up for what was right, I'd chosen the easy path. But some holes can't be filled with money. They can only be filled with truth, with courage, with the slow, painful work of forcing people to see what they'd rather hide. Robert used to say that the strongest foundations are the ones built on solid ground. He was talking about buildings, but he was right about life too. You can't build anything lasting on lies, on stolen work, on silenced voices. Eventually, it all comes down. The only question is how much damage it does when it falls. I'm grateful we chose to tear it down ourselves, carefully, deliberately, that we sorted through the rubble and kept what was worth saving, that we're building something new, not perfect, but honest. The foundation is expanding. We're opening 3 new scholarship centers this year, funding research into construction safety improvements, partnering with universities to teach ethics and engineering programs. Robert's techniques are being taught with his name attached, his contributions recognized in textbooks and industry publications. It's not everything. It doesn't bring him back or undo the years of struggle or erase the pain. But it's something. It's memory transformed into action, grief channeled into purpose, loss turned into legacy. Last Sunday, after dinner at my apartment, Sophia lingered after David went to grab dessert from the bakery downstairs. She stood by the window, looking out at the street, her arms wrapped around herself. I keep thinking about what my father would say, she said quietly, if he could see what I'm doing now. The foundation, the truth-telling, all of it. He'd be furious. He'd tell me I'm weak, that I'm destroying everything he built. And what do you think? I asked. She turned to face me. I think he was wrong. About a lot of things. About what strength means. About what matters. About what kind of legacy is worth leaving. She paused. I used to want to be just like him. Now I want to be nothing like him. That's growth, I said. It doesn't feel like growth. It feels like falling apart. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes you have to fall apart to rebuild yourself into something better. She nodded slowly. I'm trying to figure out who I am without his voice in my head telling me what to think, what to value, what to want. It's harder than I expected. It always is, I said. But you're doing it. That's what matters. When David came back with the cake, Sophia had pulled herself together, but something had shifted. She was softer that evening, more present. She asked questions about my work at the foundation, really listened to the answers. She laughed at my stories about the scholarship recipients, teared up when I told her about a young woman whose father had died in a workplace accident and who was now studying engineering to make construction sites safer. That's what Robert would have wanted, she said. Not revenge, not punishment, just making sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Yes, I agreed. That's exactly what he would have wanted. I've learned something through all of this. Something I wish I'd understood years ago. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about acknowledgement, about truth-telling, about making sure the people who were wronged are seen, recognized, remembered. Robert can't benefit from the foundation. He can't see his name in headlines or watch his techniques being taught, or know that his death is preventing other deaths. But his children can. His community can. And maybe, somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, he knows. I like to think he does. I like to think he's watching David figure out how to love someone complicated, watching Diane build her career with the same determination he had, watching Victor create beauty in the world. I like to think he's proud, and I like to think he's telling me, in whatever way the dead communicate with the living, that I did enough, that I fought hard enough, that it's okay to rest now, because I am tired, bone deep, soul tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, the kind of tired that comes from carrying weight for too long, from fighting battles that never should have been necessary, from holding a family together through sheer force of will. But it's a good tired now, the tired of someone who's finished a difficult journey, not someone stuck in the middle of one, the tired that comes before rest, not before more struggle. Next month, Sophia is stepping down as CEO of her company, not because she's being forced out, but because she's choosing to. She's staying on the board, but she's handing day-to-day operations to someone else. I want to focus on the foundation, she told us over dinner, on doing something that matters, building something honest. I've spent my whole career chasing my father's version of success, and I'm tired of it. I want to find my own definition. David looked scared when she said it, worried about the financial implications, the loss of prestige, the whispers that would follow. But he held her hand and said, "Okay, we'll figure it out. That's love, I think. Not the easy kind that shows up when everything's perfect, but the hard kind that stays when someone's tearing down their whole life to rebuild it on better ground. I'm watching my son love someone the way his father loved me, with patience and faith, and the belief that people can change if they're given the space and support to do it. It makes my heart ache with pride and grief all tangled together. 2 nights ago, I couldn't sleep. I got up and made tea and sat at my kitchen table with the lights off, watching the street through my window. A cab passed, its headlights sweeping across my walls. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. The building settled with its familiar creaks and groans. And I realized something. I was okay. Not healed, not whole, not without pain or grief or the occasional surge of anger at all the years that were stolen from us. But okay. Fundamentally, essentially, okay. I survived. I raised 3 good children. I fought for truth even when it would have been easier to accept lies. I refused to let my husband be forgotten. I chose integrity over comfort, justice over peace, truth over silence. And in doing so, I taught my children, and maybe even Sophia, that some things matter more than money, more than reputation, more than power. Things like honesty, like courage, like refusing to let wrong go unacknowledged just because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or costly. Those lessons will outlive me, will outlive all of us, will ripple out in ways I'll never see or know. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than enough. That's all any of us can really do. Build honest things. Tell true stories. Love people even when it's complicated, even when they've hurt us, even when forgiveness feels impossible, and believe that tomorrow can be better than today if we're willing to do the hard work of making it so. My name is Ellen Whiter. I'm 65 years old, and I've learned that you can't buy freedom from your past. You can only walk through it, step by painful step, until you come out the other side. The other side isn't always pretty, but the air is clearer there, and you can finally breathe. I've learned that justice delayed isn't justice denied. It's justice that arrives when you've almost stopped believing it will. And that makes it precious in a way immediate justice never could be. I've learned that people can change if they're willing to do the uncomfortable work of examining themselves and admitting fault and rebuilding from honest foundations. And I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no. No to money that comes with strings. No to silence that protects the guilty. No to comfort that requires betraying yourself. The foundation gala is in 3 days. I've been writing my speech, crossing out lines, starting over. David keeps telling me not to worry, that whatever I say will be perfect, but I want to get it right. I want to honor Robert properly. I want to tell the truth in a way that matters. Last night, I finally finished it. I read it out loud to my empty apartment, and when I got to the end, I was crying. Not sad tears, not angry tears. Something else. Relief, maybe, or release. The speech ends like this. My husband used to say that if you build something the right way, it lasts. He was talking about buildings, but the principle applies to everything. Relationships, careers, legacies. The right way is harder. It takes longer. It costs more, but it lasts. This foundation is built the right way, on truth, not secrets. on acknowledgement, not erasure, on making amends, not covering tracks. It will last because it's honest, and in lasting, it will help ensure that other families don't go through what mine did. That's not justice in the legal sense. There were no trials, no verdicts, no punishment for the guilty, but it's justice in the human sense. It's recognition. It's making sure that my husband's life meant something, that his death taught something, that his contributions are remembered and honored and built upon. And that's enough. It has to be enough, because it's all we have. If this story moved you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's facing an impossible choice between truth and comfort, between justice and peace, someone who needs to know that the right path isn't always the easy one, but it's the one that lets you sleep at night. Someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to do the right thing, that change is possible, that people can grow if they're given the chance and held accountable at the same time. This channel is about these moments, the ones where ordinary people face extraordinary moral tests and have to decide who they want to be. Every smile hides a story, and every story holds a lesson we need to hear. Subscribe if you want more of these real, raw truths. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Comment, and tell me about a time you had to choose between what was easy and what was right. Let's build a community of people who believe that honesty matters, even when it costs us everything. Because in the end, the only thing more expensive than the truth is living with a lie, and some prices are too high, no matter how many zeros are on the check. I'm still learning that lesson, still working to believe that I made the right choice, that the cost was worth it, that truth and integrity matter as much as I've always taught my children they do. Most days, I believe it. Some days, I struggle. But every Sunday, when David and Sophia come over, when I see them building something honest together, when I think about the families the foundation is helping, I know I made the right choice. I chose truth over money, justice over silence, my integrity over my comfort, and I'd do it again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being the kind of person who stays until the end of a story, even when it gets difficult, even when the answers aren't simple, even when justice looks different than we expected. The world needs more people like you, people who believe that truth matters, that the past deserves to be acknowledged, that we can build better futures by being honest about our failures. See you in the next story. Until then, remember, every smile hides a story, and some stories need to be told no matter how long they've been buried.